Look at this photograph from 1887. A mother with her twin sons, about 6 years old. All three dressed in formal clothes, the mother's arms around both boys, all standing close together in a warm family portrait. It's gentle, it's touching. It's a lovely picture of a mother's love. But when photo restoration experts improved this 137-year-old photograph in 2024, looking closely at details hidden by more than a century of fading, they found something that turned this warm portrait into something very sad. Subscribe. Because one of these twin boys was already dead when this photograph was taken, and the restoration showed which one. The photograph came to the Victorian Photography Archive in Boston in February 2024 as part of the Crawford family collection, a donation of late 19th century family photos and papers from descendants of a rich Boston family. The image showed three people in a formal Victorian studio setting, arranged carefully in a classic family portrait style. The photograph was taken in a professional photographer's studio, easy to recognize by the formal painted background and controlled lighting common in that time. The main figure was a woman in her early 30s, clearly the mother of the two boys. She wore a formal Victorian dress in dark material, black or very dark blue, with a high neck, long sleeves and fancy details typical of 1880s fashion. The dress looked elegant and costly, showing wealth and high social position. Her dark hair was styled in the proper Victorian way, pulled back neatly from her face. Her expression was calm and serious, as was normal in Victorian photography, where people had to stay completely still for long exposure times. But there was something in her eyes, a look of sadness or tension that went beyond the usual serious look in old portraits. Her gaze was straight ahead, but full of deep feeling. She was seated with her arms around two young boys who stood on either side of her. The pose was formal but also protective. She held both boys close, her hands visible on their shoulders and backs. On her right side stood one of the twin boys. He looked about 6 years old, with light hair neatly combed and parted. He wore a formal Victorian child suit, dark jacket, white shirt with collar, knickers and proper shoes. The suit was perfect, clearly new or very well cared for. He stood close to his mother, his small body against her side. His expression was calm and steady, facing the camera directly. His eyes were open, looking toward the camera. His posture was straight and still as needed for Victorian photography's long exposure times. His hands rested naturally at his sides. On her left side stood the other twin boy, also about 6 years old. He had the same light hair as his brother, styled the same way. He wore a matching Victorian suit, the same dark jacket, white shirt, knickers and formal shoes. The suits looked deliberately the same, highlighting that the boys were twins. Like his brother, he stood close to their mother, placed against her other side in a mirror image of his twin. His expression was also calm and steady, facing the camera. His eyes seemed open, his gaze forward. His posture was just as straight and formal. The balance of the composition was striking. The mother in the center, one boy on each side, both in identical clothes, both at the same distance from her, both with similar looks and poses. The overall effect was one of harmony, formality, and family togetherness. The photograph itself showed very heavy damage typical of 137-year-old images. Huge fading had turned much of it to sepia and brown shades with many fine details gone. Lots of cracks, spots, watermarks, and edge wear hid big parts of the image. Everything about the visible parts suggested a formal but loving family portrait. A mother with her twin sons, all in their best clothes, all close together, creating a picture of family love and a mother's care. The matching suits on the boys stressed their special twin connection. The mother's protective pose with arms around both children showed affection despite the formal Victorian style. Nothing in the clear parts suggested anything strange or sad. It looked like exactly what Victorian family portraits were supposed to be, a formal record of family, keeping the image of a mother and her children for future generations. The photograph came with very little information, only a note on the back saying, Mrs. Katherine Crawford with Sons, Boston, October 1887. Dr. Margaret Foster, curator of Victorian photography at the archive, did her first review. Formal family portrait, Boston studio, October 1887. Mother with twin sons about age 6. Typical Victorian setup and style. Heavy damage needs full restoration. Lovely example of Victorian family photography showing a mother's love. But Dr. Foster had no idea that when the restoration brought out details hidden by 137 years of fading and damage, this lovely example would show itself as something completely different. A memorial photograph of a mother with one living son and one dead son, both dressed the same, making one last image of family togetherness, even though one child was already gone. Dr. James Morrison, senior restoration expert, started the full digital restoration of the Crawford family photograph, using modern methods to recover information lost to extreme age and damage. The first step was ultra-high-resolution infrared scanning at 4,800 dpi. Infrared light goes through faded photographic layers differently than normal light, showing detail that looks blank in regular viewing. This special scanning could bring back information from areas that seemed empty in visible light. The photograph was a gelatin silver print on albumin paper, the usual photographic method for 1887. This process used egg white albumin coated on paper as the base for light-sensitive silver salts. Over 137 years, the organic albumin broke down a lot, causing the typical brown-yellow tones and lots of cracking seen in old Victorian photographs. As Dr. Morrison worked on the infrared scans, something unexpected appeared in the facial details of the two boys. The infrared imaging showed differences in skin texture and structure underneath that were not visible in the faded normal image. Next, he used advanced digital contrast improvement on areas where fading was worst. Victorian photographs used silver-based chemicals that faded in predictable ways. Different parts of tone faded at different speeds. By using computer methods to rebuild these patterns, digital improvement could recreate the original tone balance. As the contrast improvement worked on the boys' faces, the differences became clearer. One boy's face showed natural changes in skin tone and texture, the lively quality of photographed living skin. The other boy's face showed a clearly different quality, smoother, more even, missing the tiny variations that living skin shows even in photos. Dr. Morrison then looked at the eyes under high magnification. Victorian photography needed exposure times of 10 to 30 seconds, during which people had to stay perfectly still. Living people would show small movements, tiny shifts in eye position, very small changes in muscle tension around the eyes. Under the highest magnification of the digitally improved images, one boy's eyes showed the small signs of living eyes frozen during long exposure, natural focus, slight unevenness from muscle micro-movements, the complex reflections of studio lights in living eyes. The other boy's eyes showed something different. When improved to maximum detail, his eyes had a fixed look, too perfectly placed, too even, missing the small unevenness of living eyes. Most importantly, the reflections in the eyes showed a different pattern, the flat, even quality of eyes that had been carefully positioned by hand rather than naturally focused. The improvement also showed details in the hands. One boy's hands, visible at his sides, showed natural skin tightness and natural placement. The small differences in finger positions and skin folds that happen when living hands rest naturally. The other boy's hands showed different qualities under improvement, placed with perfect accuracy. Skin texture too smooth and even, fingers set with exact straightness that suggested careful arrangement rather than natural rest. Most importantly, the infrared imaging revealed the support structure. Behind the boy on the left, very faint but clear under infrared, were shadows and structural signs showing a posing stand. The special Victorian equipment used to hold dead subjects upright for photography. The posing stand was cleverly made to be invisible in normal photos. Thin metal rods painted to match the background, placed behind the subject to avoid shadows. But infrared imaging could detect the metal parts that normal light photography could not show. The technical proof became clear. The boy on the left was dead when this photograph was taken. His mother was holding one living son on her right and one dead son on her left, both dressed the same, making a final portrait of her twin sons together, even though one had already died. Victorian undertakers had prepared the dead boy's body with great care, washing, arranging, positioning the eyes and hands, dressing him in his best suit. The posing stand held him in a natural-looking upright position. The careful placement next to his twin made it very hard to tell which was living and which was dead. at normal view. But the technical restoration, infrared imaging showing the support, contrast improvement showing skin texture differences, high magnification revealing eye and hand placement, made the truth impossible to ignore. Katherine Crawford had posed with one living twin and one dead twin, making one last photograph showing both her sons together, keeping the idea of family togetherness for 137 years, until digital restoration showed which boy had been gone. Research into Boston death records from October 1887 gave the medical and historical background that explained the Crawford family's loss and why this memorial photograph existed. Death certificate records showed Thomas Edward Crawford, age 6 years, 2 months. Date of death, October 12, 1887. Cause diphtheria, twin of James Edward Crawford surviving. Diphtheria was one of the most feared childhood diseases of the Victorian era, especially terrible in the years before good treatment was available. In the 1880s, diphtheria was a main cause of child deaths in cities, causing about 40 to 50% of all deaths in children aged 2 to 10 years in places like Boston. The disease comes from Corynebacterium diphtheriae bacteria, which make a strong toxin that harms the throat and airways. The main sign is a thick, gray-white membrane across the throat and tonsils which can block breathing and cause death by suffocation. The toxin also affects the heart and nerves, leading to heart failure and paralysis. In 1887, medical knowledge of diphtheria was limited. The bacterial cause was only found recently in 1883 to 1884, and effective treatment with diphtheria antitoxin would not come until 1890 to 1891 and would not be widely used until the mid-1890s. Treatment in 1887 was mostly trying to remove the throat membrane by hand, a risky procedure, giving supportive care, and keeping the patient separate to stop spread. Death rates for serious diphtheria in the 1880s were about 50 to 60%. About half of children who got the disease died, even with medical help. For families with several children, diphtheria created especially frightening situations. The disease spread very easily, moving quickly through homes. When one child got diphtheria, brothers and sisters were at high risk. For twins who shared close contact all the time, the danger was even bigger. If one twin caught the disease, the other twin's exposure was almost certain. The disease moved fast and cruelly. Early signs, sore throat, mild fever, could turn to severe breathing blockage within 24 to 48 hours. Children could be healthy one day and dead from suffocation or heart problems within 3 days. The quick progress meant families often had little time to prepare for loss. For rich families like the Crawfords, who could pay for the best medical care, top doctors, private nurses, the failure to save children from diphtheria was especially painful. Money gave no protection against infectious disease in an era before antibiotics and antitoxins. The Crawfords' clear wealth, shown in their clothes and the professional photography, could not stop Thomas's death. The choice to make a memorial photograph with the surviving twin came from Victorian cultural customs around death and mourning. Victorian society had detailed mourning rules, especially for child death. Photography was an important part of Victorian mourning, keeping images of dead family members before burial. For twins, memorial photography had special meaning. The surviving twin would live his whole life as the one left behind, always shaped partly by his dead sibling. Victorian families thought that photographing both twins together, one living, one dead, kept the twin connection and gave the surviving child a lasting image of his other half. The practice of dressing dead children in their best clothes and positioning them to look lifelike was normal Victorian memorial photography method. Undertakers specialized in making dead children look as natural as possible. Eyes positioned to look open and focused, hands arranged naturally, bodies supported to look like standing or sitting naturally. The photograph was usually taken within 24 to 48 hours of death before major changes made natural appearance impossible. For the Crawford family, Thomas died October 12, 1887. The photograph was almost certainly taken October 13th or 14th, within 2 days of death and just before burial. Victorian families did not hide death the way modern society does. Children were present at death scenes, took part in mourning rituals, and saw death as a normal part of life. Katherine Crawford's choice to include 6-year-old James in a memorial photograph with his dead twin Thomas would have been seen as proper and even helpful, giving James one last moment with his brother and making a permanent image of them together. The photograph that seemed to show a loving mother with her twin sons revealed itself through restoration as a record of Victorian child death, diphtheria's terrible effect on families, and a mother's grief kept in formal portrait form. Genealogical research and family papers showed the full story of the Crawford family and the events of October 1887. Katherine Ann Crawford, née Bennett, age 32 in the photograph, was born in 1855 in Boston to a rich merchant family. She married William Harrison Crawford in 1876. William was a successful textile manufacturer who built a large fortune in the years after the Civil War industrial growth. The twin boys, Thomas Edward Crawford and James Edward Crawford, were born on August 7, 1881, in the Crawford family home on Beacon Hill. They were Katherine and William's only children after 5 years of marriage. Family letters describe the happiness at the birth of healthy twin sons to carry on the Crawford name. The twins were, by all accounts from the time, very similar in looks and always together. A letter from Katherine's sister in 1886 described them as hard to tell apart and always together, sharing everything, finishing each other's sentences as twins do. In early October 1887, both twins got sick with sore throats and fever. The family doctor, Dr. Samuel Richardson, diagnosed diphtheria on October 9th. Both boys were kept separate in the nursery with constant nursing care. James, the twin who would live, had a medium case. His throat membrane stayed fairly small, and while very sick for several days, he never lost his ability to breathe. By October 11th, his signs were getting better. Thomas, however, got much worse. The throat membrane spread quickly, blocking his airways. On October 12th, despite Dr. Richardson's efforts to remove the membrane by hand, Thomas suffocated. He died at 4:30 a.m. on October 12, 1887, with Katherine holding his hand. William Crawford's diary entry for October 12, 1887, kept in family archives, reads, "Thomas left this life this morning at 4 o'clock. Katherine cannot be comforted. James asking for his brother, not understanding why Thomas won't wake up. We have lost our boy. How do we tell his twin that half of him is gone?" Katherine made the choice to have a memorial photograph taken with both boys. Family letters show her reasons in a note she wrote to her sister on October 13th. "Thomas is gone, but James remains. And I wanted one photograph showing both my sons together. James will grow up knowing he was a twin, knowing he had a brother who looked exactly like him. I wanted him to have this image, to see himself and Thomas side by side, to remember that for 6 years they were never apart." The photographer came this morning. We dressed both boys in their matching suits, the suits I had made for them for their birthday in August. Thomas looked as though he were just sleeping. James stood beside him, understanding that something important was happening, but not really grasping that his brother was gone forever. I held them both, one living, one dead. And for that moment, while the photographer got ready, I could pretend my family was still whole. I could pretend I still had both my sons. The photograph took perhaps half a minute to expose, and during that time I held both my boys and remembered what it felt like when both were alive. The funeral was held on October 15, 1887, at Trinity Church in Boston. Thomas was buried at Mount Auburn Cemetery. James attended the funeral. Katherine believed children should take part in death rituals rather than be protected from them. James Edward Crawford lived until 1954, dying at age 73. Throughout his life, he kept the memorial photograph and reportedly told his own children that he remembered that day, remembered standing beside his brother's body, remembered his mother holding them both, remembered the photographer's flash powder making a brief bright light. In his own memoir written in 1950, James wrote, "I was 6 years old when my twin brother died. I barely remember Thomas alive. We were so young, but I clearly remember the photograph. I remember standing very still next to Thomas's body, dressed in our matching suits. I remember my mother's arms around us both. I remember thinking Thomas was asleep and would wake up soon. That photograph hung in our home my entire childhood. My mother looked at it every day. For her, it was a way to see both her sons together, even though one was already gone when the picture was taken. For me, it became the only clear image I have of Thomas and myself together. I am 73 years old now, the last survivor of that photograph. When I look at it, I see my mother holding us both, one twin living, one twin dead, trying to keep something that had already been lost. Katherine Crawford lived until 1921, dying at age 66. The memorial photograph remained her most treasured item for 34 years until her death. William Crawford died in 1903. Both are buried at Mount Auburn Cemetery with Thomas. The Crawford family photograph, once its true nature as memorial photography was shown, became more than a family tragedy. It became a record of Victorian cultural ways around death, grief, and the effort to keep family bonds despite loss. Victorian memorial photography, especially with children, was much more common than people today often realize. Historians estimate that between 1860 and 1900, memorial photographs showing dead family members made up 10 to 15% of all formal family portraits taken in American cities. For families who lost babies or young children, the percentage was even higher. As many as 30 to 40% of family photographs with young children included dead subjects. The practice came from several Victorian cultural factors coming together. First, child death was sadly common. In the 1880s urban America, about 20 to 25% of children died before age 5. Families expected to lose children and created cultural ways to deal with this reality. Second, photography was still fairly new and expensive in the 1880s. Many families had few or no photographs of living children. When a child died, families wanted at least one image to keep. Memorial photography often created the only photograph a family would ever have of a dead child. Third, Victorian mourning culture stressed keeping memories of the dead. Detailed mourning rituals, mourning jewelry with hair from the dead loved one, memorial cards, and memorial photographs were all part of complex cultural practices meant to stay connected with the dead. For twins especially, memorial photography served extra purposes. The surviving twin would live their whole life as the twin, without their twin, an incomplete pair. Victorian families believed that photographing both twins together, even if one was dead, kept the twin bond and gave the surviving twin a permanent image of what they had lost. Psychologist Dr. Rachel Thompson, who studies Victorian mourning practices, explains, Victorian memorial photography with twins shows a deep understanding of grief and identity. The surviving twin's identity was shaped by being a twin. The memorial photograph accepted this. It did not pretend the dead twin had not existed. Instead, it kept both twins together, supporting the surviving twins' experience of loss, while also keeping the reality of their twin bond. The technical skill needed to make convincing memorial photographs was great. Victorian undertakers and photographers developed special techniques for positioning dead subjects to look lifelike. Bodies were supported with hidden stands, eyes were carefully placed, and sometimes held open with small tools. Hands were arranged with care. Clothing was used to hide any signs of death. The goal was always to create images where the dead looked like simply sleeping or resting calmly, not to trick viewers into thinking they were alive, but to keep dignity and make images families could look at without facing harsh death. The ethics of Victorian memorial photography are still discussed among historians and ethicists. Some say it was good for mental health, allowing families to make calm, dignified final images, rather than having their last memories be of deathbed scenes. Others say it encouraged avoiding the reality of death and stopped healthy grief processing. Modern grief counseling generally supports making memorial photographs, especially for children and especially in cases like the Crawfords, where a surviving child needs images to understand their dead sibling. Today's hospice and child palliative care often use photographers to make tasteful memorial images for grieving families. The Crawford photograph's discovery through digital restoration raises interesting questions about historical preservation and meaning. For 137 years, the photograph existed in such bad condition that most people would simply see a damaged family portrait. The restoration revealed the truth, that this was memorial photography, that one twin was dead, that Katherine was holding one living and one dead son. Is this discovery valuable? Does it deepen our understanding of the photograph and the family's experience? Or does it break the carefully made appearance the Crawfords created? the illusion that both boys were there and that family wholeness still existed. Photography historian Dr. Sarah Collins argues, revealing that this is memorial photography does not reduce it, it adds to our understanding. We see not just a formal family portrait, but a moment of deep grief, a mother's desperate effort to keep an image of wholeness that had already been broken. We see James standing beside his dead twin, Katherine holding both boys, knowing one is gone. The restoration does not show something bad. It reveals something deeply human about love, loss, and the lengths parents will go to keep memories of their children. The photograph of Katherine Crawford with her twin sons, one living, one dead, both held close in a final family portrait, stands as proof of Victorian mourning culture, to the special grief of losing a twin, to a mother's love that insisted on one last image of her family whole, and to the power of photography to keep moments that are about both presence and absence, about holding on and letting go, about love that lasts even when death has already taken its victim. When we look at this photograph now, knowing that Thomas is dead while James stands beside him, we're seeing something Victorian families would have understood right away. That photographs can keep what no longer exists, that images can show both reality and its denial, and that sometimes the most loving act is to create an illusion of wholeness for just long enough to capture one final moment.